conservation for people and nature. So we have also decided to look at two conservation approaches here, one on land and one on marine conservation. So please, I hope you're going to enjoy the session. And we are going to quickly also look at the house rules. So I will hand over to Dr. Peng.
好，感谢 Max 的简单介绍。好，我在会议之前，我给大家说一下会议的几个规则。首先是我们在所有的这个没有专门开放大家提问和这个交流之前呢，希望大家能够关闭你的话筒以及相应的影像除非有专门的提醒请你关闭这样的话筒。第二呢，我们希望如果有提问和点评，我们希望大家在所有的这个 speaker 的交流和所有的整个过程当中，可以在聊天室进行相互的交流和提问，尤其是有对这个演讲者有问题的，希望能够直接从聊天室提出来。然后我们如果是用中文的聊天室，可以用中文、英文和法语。如果有中文的问题，我们可以提交给我们这里的聊天室的网线。网线在收集中文的所有的问题然后呢，如果我们有法语或者说有英语的这个问题请你提交给我们的是提交给对不起，那个乔家应该是提交给我们谁？如果是英文这边的，是香农吗？好，应该提交给商农。好，然后呢，我们也可以在留言区进行提问和点评。如果你提问或者说开放提问的时候，请大家说完话，说我已经说完。然后呢，让翻译进行翻译。我们可以选择适当的语言。这里今天我们有中文、英语和法语以方便我们所有的来自不同国家的，尤其是非洲国家的朋友和中国的朋友们，能够选择自己合适的语言进行很畅通的这个交流。好了，我没有更多的说，我们希望能够严格的控制时间，然后呢，特别希望大家能够参与这样的一个真正的讨论，倾听来自不同地方的2个大陆的声音。下面我要请这个 Max 接着我的这个来介绍一下我们的今天的议程。
Thank you so much, Dr. Peng. Let's quickly just go through the agenda for the day. So we will kick off by giving you an overview in terms of ACBA, which is the African Alliance, and also some background in terms of the Chinese Alliance, but also looking at the both partnerships. So me and Dr. Peng will actually share a bit of background in terms of that. And then we'll start kicking off in terms of the first session. The first session would start off with CBNRM from a wildlife perspective. And we will have 2 presentations. One is going to come from the CBNRM for wildlife conservation, and this will be a case study within Southern Africa. And that will be done by Dr. Sherlock Muyengwa. And then we will then go to the Chinese case study, the Valley of Cats, and it will be done by Xi. So she will give that perspective. So I will be the moderator for this session. We will have 10 minutes where people will then ask questions. As Dr. Peng said, we'll take these questions and we'll try and share them with the participants. We'll have a break for 5 minutes, and then we will go into our second session. And this session will deal with CBNRM from a marine conservation perspective. Both sessions will be 40 minutes, the first one and the second one. The moderator for this session will be Dr. Peng Qiu. This session will cover CBNRM from a small scale and fisheries and marine conservation. And we will have a case study focusing on East Africa, and that will be done by Dr. David Obura. And then we will look at the Chinese case study, engaging small-scale fisher and fish farmer in responsible fishery and aquaculture in Hainan, and that will be done by Han Han. So after that, we will also have another 10 minutes of questions, and Dr. Peng will handle this. And then we will, 10 minutes, and then we'll open up the third session then for general questions and answers. And then we will close this session. So looking forward in terms of the presentation. And so I will start with the first session. So Dr. Peng, you can do the first introduction in terms of background of the Chinese Alliance.
好的，谢谢 Maxi， 非常感谢。我简单介绍一下中国的生物多样性保护联盟。好，实际上中国生物多样性保护联盟是在2019年由这个世界自然基金会，然后阿拉善基金会、桃花源基金会、GEI 全球环境研究所、山水自然保护中心、自然之友以及一个地球，我们8家机构在生态环境部的这个发文的支持下，联合成立起来的、发起来的这么一个公民生物多样性的保护的联盟。其主要的目的呢，实际上就是为了推动民间参与联合国生物多样性公约第15次公约大会、第15次缔约方大会。为了这样的一些行动以及一些交流，我们发起成立了这么一个联盟。到我们的联盟已经有发展到60多家的这个机构，囊括了我们在关注生物多样性，还是青年，还是妇女，以及其他的特殊群体，还有一些其他特殊群体的这个参与。所以我们代表了中国很大一部分在致力于生物多样性保护以及可持续生态发展的这方面的一些力量。所以我们这样的一个联盟呢，在成立之后呢，其实做了很多的这个工作，其中最重要的工作当然是为配合 CBD 的交流和这个行动。在这个行动过程当中，我们其中希望能够跟非洲的这一方面的，我们很想听到非洲方面的作为一个最重要的生物多样性大陆，从来自他们的声音，也想倾听来自他们的这个经验，甚至一些这个教训。同时呢，我们也希望分享在中国进行社区保护、生态保护以及生物多样性的监测保护等等这方面的一系列的我们的实践，也促进我们双方在民间上的生物多样性的相互交流，也把这样的声音呢，希望能够带到我们的这个 COP15的大会上去，让全球呢来听见我们这些表达的声音，或者说我们这些优秀的案例。所以这是中国的生物多样性保护联盟，是一个比较松散的网络性的平台。同时我们现在大概有60多家，我也希望大家如果也有兴趣的机构也可以继续加入，我们也在这里头后续的会举办一系列的这个生物多样性的平行论坛，包括这个我们 NGO 的平行论坛、青年的平行论坛，以及呢我们商业与生物多样性平行论坛，还有一些机构参与的这个生态文明的平行论坛。从现在一直到我们的10月份，我们会有一系列的活动，希望大家能够参与。我们也非常的高兴能够给我们的非洲的这样的 CSO 的联盟建立这样的一个对话的联络机制，然后呢，通过这样的联络机制，能够在后续的过程当中，我们能够推动很多实际的一些工作。我简单就介绍到这里，下面有请这个 Max 来介绍一下非洲的联盟的具体情况。谢谢。
Thank you, Dr. Peng. Just a bit of history in terms of the alliance from the African point of view. The African CSOs Biodiversity Alliance, known as ACBA, was formed in 2020. We have over 80 members, but we have around 30 of them that are very active depending on what the topics are and what the participation is. ACBA and the CSABC decided to partner
你不要说
in
普通话，
July.
连个字幕都没有。
字幕都没有啊。
他不是说双文的吗？
是啊。
Okay. ACBA and the CSABC decided to partner in July 2020. And as Dr. Peng saying, was really much to look at our commonality in terms of issues that we want to collaborate on biodiversity conservation, looking at preparation for COP15 at the coming conference. So this is just the first part of a webinar series and some activities that we will be engaged in. We are actually looking forward to have a continuation in terms of this collaboration and coordination at all levels. And so today is the first day of trying to share some of our experiences on both continents and the countries, but very much looking at best practices and lessons learned and see how we are going to fit that into the upcoming COP15 conference in China. So thank you so much. So can we go now to the first session in terms of the presentations? So we are going to have 4 speakers, and I'm going to be sharing the first session in terms of the speakers. And so let me start with the first session. And I will introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Sherlock Muyengwa, and he is a monitoring and evaluation specialist or advisor with the Resource Africa organization that is based in Southern Africa, in South Africa. Dr. Sherlock has more than 10 years of relevant experience with both rigorous quantitative and qualitative analysis and evaluation and survey design, as well as a breadth of experience in Zimbabwe, mostly in the agriculture sector, food security sector, and livelihood sectors. Some of these skill sets are inclusive of survey designs, implementation, participatory methodologies, and structured interviews, and also on a focus a lot also on group facilitation. He has also applied a lot of these experiences, having most recently served on as a coordinator for social impact randomized control trial for a project within USAID named as USAID Conflict Management and Mitigation Edge IRC evaluation. So in this capacity, he trained over 40 research assistants and team leaders and participated in designing the sampling protocol. He also designed the baseline instruments and assisted with data cleaning and report writing. So, so he has also worked in several capacities, for instance, with CIRAT, with the European Union Livestock Project in Southeast Lowveld of Zimbabwe, and where he designed and collected baseline data and so forth. So let me welcome Dr. Sherlock Muyengwa to share our first presentation that is looking at Southern Africa and CBNRM experiences in Southern Africa. Please, Dr. Sherlock Muyengwa.
Thank you, Maxi. Let me share my screen. Maxi, confirm is okay.
Yes, I can see it from my end. I hope everybody can see.
All right, thanks. So let me add to the bio. So the bio is more focused on the current M&D work that I'm doing. But in addition to that, I've also worked extensively in Namibia, Zambia, Botswana, South Africa, Mozambique, with communities, some of which I'm going to present here. So a lot of the work that I've done is included spending time and staying with CBNRM communities around Southern Africa. And for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to do 3 things. Number one, provide an overview of the CBNRM landscape in Southern Africa, very selective in my approach. And this summarizes some of the work that we are currently doing with Resource Africa, which is to bring together information and data around CBNRM and its contribution to the Southern African economies. The second part, I'm going to zoom in onto 2 examples from Namibia with the purpose of illustrating how CBNRM looks at the local level for people to better understand what the challenges are. And then I'll finish off with one slide that's sort of forward-looking in order to answer the question that is posed in this session, which is, how can CBNRM deliver inclusive, fair, and equitable conservation for people and also for nature? And briefly as well, the presentation benefits from, like I've said, the work that Resource Africa is doing, but also from the contribution of the Community Leaders Network, which is a network of representatives within Southern Africa, some of whom provided us with the data that I'm going to present. So I want to acknowledge their contribution in this presentation. So briefly, CBNRM, and with a major focus on the wildlife sector, I've selected Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, and Tanzania. But I should underline that we've got countries such as Malawi that have got strong forestry-based programs that also generate income within the country. Even in all the countries that are listed here, we've got other resources contributing significantly to rural livelihoods. But here I present selectively just the contribution of the wildlife, and more specifically hunting. But I also note that we've got communities that have fairly established tourism enterprises that also generate income, particularly in Namibia and Botswana. So in Zimbabwe, we have a program called the Campfire Program, and all these programs are organized around similar principles where income is generated from specific economic activities, whether hunting, tourism, and there's an agreed revenue sharing agreement which allows part of the funds to be formally and systematically channeled back to communities. And in Zimbabwe, for the Campfire Program, this is based on the Zimpact data from 2019. This amounted to close to 3.26 million, which represents an average of 45 to 55% of the income being channeled directly to communities. We'll talk about how the information is used, how the money is used when it gets to community level, as we zooming on the specific 2 case studies we selected. Zambia is also got an ADMET program, which allocates about 50% of the income to communities. And just looking at the most recent figure, that's about 167 million in 2017. It was also slightly higher for 2016 and fluctuating as well for the other years. We're still in the process of collecting systematically for for the years 2019, 2020, and hopefully we will finalize our database so that we've got systematic data. Botswana, also significant given the size. It's got 16 CBOs, and across the 16 CBOs, approximately 50% as of 2013 of that income was being allocated to communities. That's close to 1 million USD. Namibia has got one of the robust programs in the region, and you'll hear more about the 2 communities that we've selected for the purpose of this presentation. But what's unique with Namibia is 100% of the income goes back to communities, and about 2.73 million USD in 2019 was allocated directly to communities. In Mozambique, slightly a different picture, but we are glad that is actually evolving because they are in the process of establishing an association that would increase the representation of the locals. But the latest figure we have is for 2015, and with about 586 million of the total revenue, and then 20% of that was then allocated to communities. Tanzania, the community wildlife areas similarly also generate sufficient income, and approximately 45% of that income is allocated to communities. And by communities in our context, when you're looking within Southern Africa, we are not very philosophical about what they are, but these are in most cases very defined boundaries where criteria for inclusion and exclusion is very clear. In Zimbabwe, normally we use the concept of a ward that makes up a community. In Namibia, it's actually a conservancy or a clearly demarcated geography that constitutes a community. So this is sort of the big overview of what is happening in Southern Africa with regards to the wildlife sector of the wildlife industry and sort of the global contribution of this sector to the livelihoods and the welfare or the income within the communities. But I want to zoom in a bit so that people then understand that how do we end up with such huge figures? What is happening on the ground? What is happening at local level, which is clearly defining the nature of CBNRM itself. Across all these areas, we can derive basic organizing principles that these communities can manage these geographies or these areas, and normally through elected or representative committees. They are also formally guided by constitutions in terms of how benefits are allocated. They comply with national policies and normally convene in order to make collective decisions, usually at annual general meetings. And more importantly, they are also framed, or they operate within set operating procedures. For example, in Namibia, a lot of these communities comply with the regulations that are set by MET. In Zimbabwe, they comply to the regulations that are set by the rural district councils and Zimbabwe parks. Similarly, with Zambia and also Botswana, the Department of Parks is very instrumental in supporting these communities to manage. So what we then see is these entities sort of take formal recognition and contribute towards the formal organization and management of natural resources. So there we start getting the benefits of nature management and conservation through the institution for the enactment these CBNRM programs. So let me zoom into the two specific case studies. So what you see here is, I'll attempt to pronounce the second community, but what you see here is a map of Namibia, and what is plotted in green are the various conservancies. So this is land that is being conserved through wildlife programs, or we call them community conserved areas. So for those that are familiar with the ecology of Namibia, where the greater part is a desert, this is really a significant piece of land that's being managed by these conservancies. And I've selected two case studies, namely Ehi, Rovikupa, and the Kwadi Klaus. I'll just call it the elephant corner for now. Maxi will help me later with the actual pronunciation. But what you see here is remember we're talking about both the social, economic, and the conservation benefits through CBNRM. Is one thing that these communities are able to do is to develop land use plans that allow them to systematically manage certain pieces of land. So the demarcations, they might not be coming out clear, but from the first map, we've got specific management zone, exclusive for wildlife, and so on, and so on. Similarly, even for the elephant corner, the different colors, the management zones allow people to organize and to systematically manage land, apply rules for sustainable use, and so on. So for the two cases, for example, A Rovikupa manages 190,665 hectares of land and supports about 2,500 residents, whereas the elephant corner looks after 364,000 hectares and approximately supports 4,000 people. So once the communities demarcate the pieces of land, they then have to scout for opportunities in terms of how they can generate and earn income. So for the first community A, currently they only have a hunting outfit. So this is a hunting, sort of their hunting tent sitting in the middle of the bush, which generates income for the community. And then other communities, the Elephant Corner, for example, combines both hunting and they also own a lodge. So they've got 100% of the lodge, which then allows them to lease it to the private sector based on an agreed cost and profit sharing arrangement. And then these funds are then channeled. Remember, I talked about the elected representative committees. The funds are then channeled formally through these structures and invested into different social programs. So the social programs can also, they also take different form depending on the priorities that are set during the AGM and or the social pressures within the given community. So here I've put a table just to compare the two. So you find for the Elephant Corner is mostly employment creation. They also pay fees. They support water infrastructure, which is also supported in the first conservancies. Meat, which is what you actually see in the photo here. Women who've just received their meat rations from hunting that would have occurred within the communities. And they also provide, they also look at other social investments on a need basis. So they conservancies or these institutions also become a form of social support and help community members with access to loans at very low interest and so on. And then in the AE Cooper Conservancy, we also see a diversity of some of the things that they do is to try to use that income to support their school. The blocks are actually the different areas in the conservancies. They also support farmers associations and cooperatives in order to build more resilient and also improve social capital around the conservancies. They also have got a unique way of channeling benefits, which is to provide quotas for the members to use. So community members in these conservancies are given rights to hunt for their specific needs. And as we broaden out, looking across the region, you see more or less a variation of these benefits. Obviously, more pronounced in areas that earn a lot of income, as was the case in Botswana before the hunting ban and so on. But more or less, you find investments being done across the region by these small communities. And remember, this is where we are aggregating our data from, going upwards, and then trying to assess the total contribution of this income even to the national development or the national context for the different countries. So remember, benefits are often associated with costs and or with challenges, and these programs are not spared from these challenges. Based on the two case studies that I'm presenting today, you find
ces deux exemples nous permettent de constater
is issues of drought, prominent human-wildlife conflict, what you see in my extreme left here, potentially an elephant about to destroy a home. On the extreme right is water infrastructure that's been damaged by elephants. The donkeys preyed upon by lions. And then this is a conservancy team right in the sort of the third going to my left is a conservancy team that's recovering wildlife that is succumbed to drought. And the challenges, as we understand them, diverse as you move from place to place, but more recently reported cases of increased human-wildlife conflict, pressure on the demarcated conservation zones for settlement, and in more connected areas, you've got challenges of poaching, both for the small game and also for the elephant. South Africa and some parts of Zim, challenges of poaching also around the rhino and so on. In short, what we're saying is CBNRM benefits, but also associated challenges, some of which we've highlighted here. So let me quickly end my presentation by just providing quick conclusions and also ideas for looking ahead in terms of how we can enhance CBNRM to deliver on these benefits and so on. So in short, what we've seen over the years, which is more than about three to 4 decades now of CBNRM in the region, is it has shown high levels of resilience in the face of numerous challenges. So since the programs were started, they've gone up and down. But what we're beginning to see is these institutions are actually resilient in the face of the many local and global challenges. Over the years, these programs if offered for us as we look at the sort of the universe of the data that we have, is they've stepped in to provide key services to communities and also developing human capital, which is very important. And I made reference to that when I gave examples of school fees being paid. We also have other countries providing scholarships for universities, mostly in areas that have traditionally been marginalized and in some instances neglected. But that being the case, we see the emergence of new challenges, which I think platforms such as this can help address and leverage communities and also strengthen the resilience. For example, issues of climate-related shocks, like what I've shown on the challenges where drought hits and there's no water for wildlife, no water for livestock, resulting in losses. More recent, the pandemic, COVID-19, which has hugely impacted incomes for these communities. We also have some thematic study that was commissioned through Resource Africa with the participation of the Community Leaders Network, which illustrates some of the impacts of COVID-19 on these communities. And I think that can be shared as well through Maxi and ACBA. And then another recent challenge is the shifting global norms around hunting and so on, which has a bearing on the ability of communities to generate income. So given these local and global and emerging challenges, we feel there's need in these areas to support new forms of resilience-based programming, to support this work that has been going on, for example, through new financing mechanisms such as grants. For example, Namibia, Botswana have been leading in this area, providing alternative incomes to communities that have lost salaries due to the pandemic and so on. Or some of the proposals that are being discussed around harmonized social cash transfers in order to support these communities in terms during the current crisis. Another alternative is just to broaden the formal markets for wildlife and increase competition, value, and so on. So in short, seeking to diversify the wildlife economy for Southern Africa so that communities can also gain, they can also earn more income or increase the value of what they're currently earning. And lastly, it's a recommendation that's directed to these two platforms, which is to ensure continued support of local communities at both regional and international level for them to be able to articulate the issues that affect their lives. For example, the whole Community Leaders Network, ACBA, and the current forum as well, helps communities to address some of the issues around shifting global norms, around some of the traditional land uses that Southern Africans have so much relied on, and so on. So I think, Maxi, I'll end there to keep in time and hopefully be able to respond to the comments and questions. But thanks for now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sherlock Muyengwa, for a very comprehensive overview in terms of the community-based natural resource program in Southern Africa, and also sharing your experience in terms of the case studies and making a comparison between the two case studies. But I also just want to emphasize in terms of the recommendations that you have given in terms of your conclusion, especially having emphasized the issue of looking at a new approach in terms of CBNRM and emphasizing the issue of resilience, and also between the two platforms that we continue having this dialogue and making sure that this dialogue also makes sure that communities' voices are involved and we facilitate these processes. So let's move to China, and I would like to introduce my new, my next presenter. I would like to introduce Shi, Dr. Shi. My apology, I cannot pronounce the surname, but Dr. Shi she's a PhD candidate in ecological economics at the School of Environmental Science and Engineering at the Peking University in China. She graduated from Peking University and then Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. She has been engaged in ecological conservation and climate change economics, and has been working on community conservation work and project management in Mekong River Basin and the Tibetan Plateau. The project that she's going to share with us from a China's perspective as a case study is known as the Valley of the Cats, a snow leopard ecotourism project that was awarded a Paulson Prize for Sustainability in 2020. Now, just a little bit about herself. She has an interest in facilitating and helping international or local environmental groups with conservation efforts in Lakang watershed in Yunnan, China. They also hope to build a network to share common interest and information, and also looking at long-term funding mechanisms and a portfolio of conservation seeds into the area and contribute to solving the problems. Her personal goal is to compromise the human needs and the nature by creative and practical methods and economic and cultural or political. She's very much interested also in ecosystem services, natural capital, and disaster adaptation to climate change. So let me allow Dr. Shi now to share her experience with the Valley of the Cats, which is one of our terrestrial presentation in terms of China. Dr. Shi,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Max, for your introduction. Thank you, Dr. Sherlock, for a wonderful presentation to learn from the African experience. Can you close your sharing so I can? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. It was wonderful to hear about African stories and the case studies in the conservation hunting. Today, I'm going to share another story about wildlife conservation in ecotourism. As we all know, ecotourism is very successful in Africa, but we just started, so we hope to learn from Africa's stories. The place is the Valley of Cats. As you can know that this place is habitating cats like snow leopard and the common leopard. So my sharing is about the community-based ecotourism in Sanjiangyuan National Park of China. Thanks the two platforms to give me this opportunity to share our cases. Okay, first, I also want to contribute our comments on the community-based nature resource management. So wildlife is also a renewable and non-consumptive natural resource. Actually, it can also provide us many benefits, like the direct consumptive use of species, like harvest or hunting is all direct consumptive use. But there are also non-consumptive uses of species, like ecotourism or photography, that you won't reduce the population of the species, but also enjoy the benefit from wildlife. And the third benefit is the buffering effect of biodiversity, like water equality or soil erosion. But all these benefits are shared by all not only local communities, but also the visitors and the consumers, and also the general public. There is a mismatch of the benefits and the costs. For example, the coexistence costs include safety, indirect effect on domestic animals. For example, the competition for grassland and also the diseases. So the local communities are contributing to the wildlife conservation, but they are not enjoying all of the benefits, but they need to stand for the costs. So there is a need for conservation projects to transfer the benefits and share the benefits together. And also there is something special for wildlife, is that wildlife should be conserved as a community collectively, but the benefit can be individual. For example, ecotourism, it can be private profits. So there is a conflict or something you need to work out between communities and the individuals. So that's why we are introducing community-based conservation here. So Shanshui Conservation Center is one of the local NGOs in China engaged in the species and the ecosystem conservation. Our approach is use these community conserved areas that we will help the communities to build on their collective governance and management and do the biodiversity monitoring and patrolling themselves. At the same time, develop sustainable livelihoods like ecotourism or eco-products, so they can also benefit more from the wildlife. And then if there are wildlife conflicts and risks from the climate, the resilience of climate change should also be enhanced. So there are some cases in China, but today I'm going to show the most successful or most famous case, Qinghai Sanjiangyuan National Park case called the Valley of the Cats. To give you some background about Tibetan Plateau. So Tibetan Plateau is one of the most important habitat to large cannibals. You can see from the world maps that Africa and the Tibetan Plateau are all places that have a lot of large cannibals. So we have 8 cannibals here. Snow leopard is one of the very important flagship species. It is listed as vulnerable in IUCN Red List and is very famous as a very a famous species, not only in China, but also in other countries. And the Sanjiangyuan area is just in Tibetan Plateau and is one of the most important habitat for snow leopard. Sanjiangyuan in Chinese, it means 3 source rivers, 3 source of rivers, Yangtze River, Yellow River, and the Mekong River. So you can see from the map. The national parks are a new pilot protected area in China since 2015. So like Yellowstone National Parks, we are also building national parks that people can enjoy the ecosystem service there. And the place we are talking about, Nanshan, is just at the park of Mekong River source. So this is a picture of the place, the Valley of the Cats. Because of the mixed landscape, there are a lot of rich biodiversity, and it's very high. It's above 300, 800 meter elevation. There are a lot of species here, like the fox, snow leopards, common leopards, and other ungulates. So here we have very high wildlife sighting rate. And this is one of the conditions to do ecotourism. So the Nansai Township has 3 villages. They are all Tibetan nomads with their religion belief in the equality of all beings. So they don't kill animals, but still there are some illegal huntings in the past. Their livelihood is not very poor, so they don't rely on the tourism a lot, but the income is still important for them. 2 important conditions for the ecotourism is that they have relatively very effective community governance structure, and they have a very supportive local government. Why we need to do conservation here? Because there are some potential threats from the degradation of grassland, human disturbance, and illegal hunting. The drivers for these threats, including climate change, overgrazing, the development of private tourism, and the human-wildlife conflict. To solve these problems, we have this solution as community-based ecotourism that the livelihoods can relieve their grazing pressure to compensate some of their costs and also incentivize some positive conservation behavior. And also the national park encourage us to do this pilot project because they hope to prohibit the private tourism, but they also hope the benefit can be shared among the community. So we have 5 steps of this project. First, we do a lot of biodiversity monitoring and patrolling. Actually, the monitoring are done by the local communities. So they manage the infrared cameras and they collect the data. We have the scientists to analyze the data, but all of the cameras are managed by the communities. And then the scientists can analyze the dynamics and the potential threats from the data they gave us. And by now we have recognized 46 snow leopard and 12 common leopards. So this is something done for the scientific part, but this is only a foundation. Second, to develop this ecotourism, we select host families. It's not us to select the families because this should be a collective decision. Actually, the national park, the township government, also the community, they jointly select pilot families based on their locations, their labor conditions, vehicles, and other conditions. Because this is very important because they are the direct beneficiaries. And based on their performance and evaluations, there also be some cases that some families will be phased out because they are not functioning very well. The second is to design the tour and the training. Different from some private company tour, this tour is all based on communities. So all of the travelers need to stay with the families. And we did some training with the communities to for the guides, for the biodiversity, wildlife sighting, and also how to receive foreigners with language barriers. But you can see they are doing this very well. Fourth is important is the legislation and the financial and the conflict management. This part is very important because they make this point, we make the rule. The cooperative was authorized for ecotourism concession in Sanjiangyuan National Park in 2018. What is a concession? Concession means that Only this cooperative is legally authorized to do ecotourism. So other private ecotourism is forbidden. And the community manage the ecotourism together, so they can share all the benefits. So there will not be very bad competitions. And 4 persons were selected by the community as a management team. So they will charge the tourists, and they also solve conflicts. And there are a lot of legal files that the different stakeholders need to finish before they enter the place. And finally, their collective decisions on the use of community fund and conservation fund, because you can see from this picture that the income is shared between households and the communities. The families have the direct income of 45%. The community fund also consists of 45%, because the whole community need to share the benefit. And there is 10% from the profit to put into the conservation fund. The conservation is for conserve the snow leopard and other wildlife. So the ecotourism is also encouraging conservation behaviors. And the 5th step is the outreach. So we did a lot of advertisement on the place that you can see. We invite the general public to this place. And you can see the photographers, nature lovers, and media come. Now there are a lot of people know this place. Also, volunteers helps a lot. The governance structure of the ecotourism is like this. So the National Park Administration authorized concessions. The cooperatives can share the benefits to the conservation fund, host families, and the village. The visitors need to be supervised by the local government. What is our doing? So Shanshui Conservation Center, we are NGO, we are just supporting the cooperatives and supporting visitors. And at the same time, we can do some of the supervisions. And then, what's your experience in the Valley of the Cats? You can see, if you make a reservation, be authorized, and the guide will pick you up in the airport, and you stay with them for the whole trip, and then give some feedback. You can see this on our website. And these are some of the pictures, the wildlife photos, and some pictures from the guides and the visitors. And these are some of our volunteers. By end of 2020, the 21 families also already received more than 400 persons of about 1 million China's yuan. But I think this is still a small number compared to other countries, but this is the start. We hope that this can be continued to other places in China. And this project was awarded the 2020 Paulson Prize for Sustainability. So what is the conservation outputs? This is very hard to evaluate. We use the camera traps data to see the relative abundance index by species. You can see this blue line is the snow leopard relative abundance. I think there cannot be a very big difference here, but we hope the population just stays stable is our goal. And the survey shows that 8.7 more households would have positive attitudes towards snow leopards compared to other places. So finally, the lessons we learned is that the community-based natural resource management solution emphasize the benefit sharing for communities and the individuals, and it's very important to incentivize and monitor conservation behaviors. Also, there are challenges like the linkage to the market and the great culture shock to the traditional nomadic life, and also the long-term sustainability. If the NGO phased out, should this ecotourism last very well? And finally is the resilience to uncertainties like the COVID-19. Actually, we closed this tour ecotourism for a long time last year, but this year it's still run successfully, but just only to Chinese tourists. Okay, this is all of my presentation, and thank you, and welcome you all to Sanjiangyuan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A very, very good overview, but also very beautiful photos in terms of those cats. Very beautiful valley.
I know.
So let me just quickly summarize just a couple of points from Xi's presentation that I picked up. And I must also say that there's a couple of similarities in terms of some of the approaches that I see in the two presentations, but just a few things that I picked up as part of the presentation is that, you know, your community from a governance point of view, I realized that there's exactly community conserved areas, the CSAs that you're working with as part of the Cut of the Valley project. So you have a very people-centered project here. The other thing is that I also picked up that ecotourism can relieve some of the pressures that you are currently having, especially when we look at the valley and the degradation that is happening in terms of some of the climate change and the poaching issues that are already happening. So ecotourism seems to be a good driver in terms of addressing a lot of your issues. Oh, the localized M&E systems, I was, must say, quite impressed in terms of how, and maybe you clarify that later on, how local communities are involved and they have their own monitoring systems in place. Issues around the policy environment that is in place and that is supporting some of the work that you're doing. Clear benefits to communities and households, that was something that we also picked up. But the one thing also that I was impressed with is your community funding that really addresses benefits plus the community, plus the conservation activities that you are involved with, and also address long-term sustainability in terms of the project itself. So a good lessons learned, and I see a lot of approaches that are similar also to the terrestrial project that was presented by Dr. Sherlock. And so I will now open up the floor for some questions and some comments. We have a bit of time. So yes, I have two questions that I picked up. Let me start with the first presenter, that was Sherlock. I will also, some of the questions might also be because I could see some similarities. So when I asked Sherlock the question, I would also sometimes see if you can relate to some of the question, and that's the same thing to Sherlock. So the first question that I saw, Sherlock, and this was directed to you when you were doing the presentation, and this is coming from Fred Kuma from the African Wildlife Foundation, and he's asking, when he is looking at, let me just go back to your presentation, he realized that looking at the figures that you provided, there was a much more higher income in terms of income for Namibia, but Namibia does not have a high biodiversity in comparison with countries like Mozambique, Tanzania, the DRC, and so forth, as we know. So what do you think? What is the difference with a country with a very limited biodiversity, but the income is quite high? So that is the first question. And then I will also just go to the second question that came from Tae, and that is saying, you know, when you look at the issue of governance, there seems to be, I think you presented issues around local governance issues, but over the years, as part of this program, we have also picked up that there is a lot of the same, or a rotation of the same leadership in some of these committees. So, and that also creates a lot of issues that has been very challenging in terms of elite capture. So having the same people later on also creates sometimes some problems and challenges. So he's also just asking how we are addressing these issues around elite capture. So can I have those two questions while I'm still gathering some other questions? So I start with Sherlock, and if you also feel like this is a challenge for your project, please feel free to come in and also answer.
Thanks, Maxi. So the first question, I think from what she has just presented now, is you find that our colleagues in China are fantastic at creating a product that can be marketed, right? So you might have high biodiversity, but if you don't market that well, then it's difficult to attract income. And particularly this is the case with most of the African countries compared to Namibia. Namibia's CBNRM program, I think, is well designed, identified with the needs of communities. And remember, some of our clients, they actually choose destinations based on governance issues. Does the money go to communities, or it's captured by an elite, and so on? And Namibia was fantastic in that they were able to empower communities to benefit directly from that. So that contributes to the diversity that you see. But what you also find is once governments decentralize, which is if they give full rights, as in the case of Namibia, that unlocks a lot of innovativeness around the local communities. I think the whole Namibia landscape is full of amazing 86 diverse communities that are generating income in quite unique ways. Good established craft centers, for example, hunting outfits, and so on. So I think this is what is lacking in the other countries. It's almost like when you look at the ease of doing business, the well-endowed resources countries with the most resources are not necessarily going to be doing well, but ones that have got easier institutional rules and so on, those ones tend to be doing well. So I think that is the success story behind Namibia. Tae, very spot on in terms of the local level challenges around elite capture and the recycling of the same individuals. Even I can even add that you can also have challenges of the co-optation of these local institutions into local political structures or government structures, contributing to the centralization of entities that are otherwise supposed to be very decentralized. There's no one answer that fits all, unfortunately. But what we've experimented with, even in places such as Namibia, is to try and decentralize as much as possible. So try to aim for the lowest level unit that allows communities to interface and to be able to discuss problems, find solutions, and so on. And obviously, the more you invest in human capital, you also start to address some of these issues of elite capture. Exchange visits have also been very powerful in transforming how conservancies are governed. And particularly, I'll just make reference to cases that I know. I know the the entire Zambezi, northern top part, formerly the Caprivi area, all those conservancies up there have been very instrumental in transforming leaders or leadership across CBNRM programs in Zambia, in Zimbabwe as well, where a lot of people have traveled across the border, and they come back enlightened and improve the way they run their programs. But these are just examples of what can be done. And in my response in the chat box, I was actually saying, I know you've been in this area, we've met in conferences as well, discussing the same. What would be your suggestions as well for fixing some of these perennial problems? Thanks, Max.
Thank you so much, Sherlock. I have a specific question for you that is coming from a lady called, I think she's from, I'll just check now. But she's asking, first of all, she says very impressive. I think you have seen that on the chat box. But her question is that she's wondering what the government, the Chinese government is towards the CSOs in China and to CSOs, I'm just finding and to CSOs taking this sort of initiative in conservation. How much flexibility do you think that the government has? So that is the first question. And then there was another second question, I think this is both to you and Sherlock. When you are referring to communities, are you referring to indigenous communities or are you referring to both local communities and also indigenous communities? So those are the two questions. So can I let you respond to that question?
Yeah, very good questions. Thank you. The first question about the government attitude towards CSOs in China. I think increasingly government has already realized the role of the CSOs in many areas like the social work and also the environmental issues. So they also encourage the CSOs to participate in many of the of their work, especially piloting some of the projects. For example, like this project, we are invited by the national park to do this pilot. So if there is some experience, so they can do it broadly. And also they give us some of the money. So the government also provide funding for CSOs. But of course, CSO is growing in China. It's not so many like in some other countries. So I think there are many steps to do. Yeah. And the second questions about the indigenous people. Actually, I think for the place we are talking about is indigenous people because they are living there for thousands of years. But of course, in some other rural areas, there are both indigenous people and also some people move to this place. So it can be different. But for this place, it's all Tibetan people that they have been leading traditional life for many, many years. So, and I think they own the grassland and they know how to manage the grassland best. Yeah. And I think there was a previous question about the leadership, community leadership. I think there is some way to go because for traditional Tibetan families, it's still the elder male that being the leaders. For example, the 4 persons management team, they are all selected by the communities, but they are all elder male. But we can see that some young female, they show their interest and they want to participate. And we encourage them to open some of the opportunities to discuss and some opportunities to be trained, like foreign language or know more information from the outside.
Thank you, Shi. There's this, we have a couple of minutes, but there's an important question that came from somebody, which I just want to add to your CSO question that was asked earlier on. Somebody is asking on the platform that from an African perspective, we have this view that Chinese people don't care about animals, and that is also in the view of as you know, around poaching and all of these issues. And now we see the cat of the valley, and we realize there's very good projects that are going out there. From your perspective, how do you think these can be shared to change some of these perceptions that people, not just Africa, I'm sure everywhere else also have, but mostly coming from the continent? So how do we share moving forward in terms of, and I'm sure there's so many others projects that we will also hear later, where Chinese people care about the environment, they care about nature, they care about wildlife. So what would you share with us? What can we do to change that perception?
Yes, yeah, we all notice that many foreigners think like, oh, Chinese eat a lot of wildlife and they don't care about environment, so the air is very dirty. I think these are some very previous impression for Chinese. For example, last year we did a survey on Chinese public attitudes towards wildlife trade ban. That almost 90% people think the eating of wildlife should be banned. And also later in March, it was banned. And also for the nature, I think more and more people are realizing wildlife is very important and they like to go these kind of trips. So I think what we can do, especially for CSOs, is to be more open and to attend the platforms like this, that we can have some opportunities to share our opinions and stories, because I think many people don't know about China. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chi. Shylock, there was a question around when you refer to communities, is it indigenous or is it local communities? What were you referring to? I'm just bringing that question back to you.
Okay, thanks, Max. I did make reference in the first slide that I presented that when we are talking of communities in Southern Africa, it's a mix. Some are geographically defined, as in Namibia. When you talk of a conservancy, it also corresponds to a geographical space. Some follow political boundaries, like when you look at Zambia and Zimbabwe. When we talk of a ward, that's a political boundary, and so on. And in that, we also have pockets that include indigenous communities. And also remember, the definition is not straightforward. One group that is classified as indigenous in Botswana, it does not have official recognition in Zimbabwe. For example, in Zimbabwe, we have got two groups that can potentially be classified as indigenous, but the law does not formally recognize any indigenous community. So everyone is regarded as a local community. So in short, it includes all those geographically, politically, and also some of the indigenous peoples that we have in the region.
Good. So thank you so much. I'm not seeing any questions on the platform. I have my last individual question to the two of you, and then I'll ask you just to give your final comments. Maybe one of the questions I want to ask both of you is that, Shylock, for instance, how would you incorporate a lot of, because these projects have been in Southern Africa implemented over a long period, I think more than 30 years now in some of the countries, CBNRM as an approach. But now we are faced by, a lot of challenges that you have mentioned. Now I'm looking at how do you actually incorporate a lot of these new approaches into CBNRM, for instance, when we look at the youth. Africa has a a large youth, and at the moment, they are the ones now, especially with COVID-19, that has been the experiences that they are moving back into rural areas, and there's a lot of pressure on our natural resources in terms of that. So how do you modernize, include them as part of the way moving forward? And also, I would like to forward that question also to Shi, looking at the communities that I looked at that you work with, exactly the same thing. They are older, maybe the younger communities coming out of your project want to see something different. So how do you try and address that as part of the way of moving forward and integrate them into making sure that these projects are sustainable? And then I will let you have your conclusion, and then we close this session.
Hello, Maxi. Maxi，我想补充一下，因为你提出了非常好的问题，我相信他们回答的话可能会非常有兴趣，在后边去继续讨论。但是我们可能要留一点时间给我们后面还有2位这个 speaker， 所以如果可能的话，我们先让这2位 speaker 先说一下，然后我们后面有时间给大家再继续这个讨论。我相信这个问题是非常的重要，可以吗？
对，
非常感谢 Maxi， 请你总结一下，我们马上往下一个环节，好吗？谢谢。
Okay, good. Thank you so much, Dr. Peng. Yes, we need to keep time. So quick, short summaries from both of you, and then we close this session.
Okay, but I think what there's scope for Southern Africa and Africa to work closely with the CSOs in China, because we are facing similar challenges. There's a lot to learn from China, and they also have got a lot to learn from us, because we've been implementing these programs for the past 40 years. Obviously, solutions are bound to be context specific, but I think my quick summary is there's just scope for us to work together, learn from each other, and particularly I've liked, like I said, from China, I've liked the destination packaging that they're able to do, the documentation of the activities that they are doing. I think it's something that we can benefit from. I'll end there, and then hopefully have a chance again to speak bilaterally with some of the presenters here.
Okay, Dr. Shi, a quick summary of.
Yeah, thank you. I would make it very short, and thank you for your question about the youth. I think both for the youth of Tibetan people, the youth of CSOs, we all need to be innovative for the challenges, to always have innovations solutions, and also be open-minded. Like this, we need to open our mind and share what we have learned to the world. I think this is also my comments on your questions, and now also our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the 2 presenters. There will still be time where we have proper discussions, but thank you so much. So we are going to move over to our second session, and I will hand over to Dr. Peng.
Okay, thank you, Maxi. Thank you. It's great. It's a great discussion right here. 非常感谢我们所有的我们前面2位的这个发言人，以及我们 Max 的非常精彩的主持。我想大家还有很多的问题会在后面会继续深入的探讨。我们就接着进入下一个环节，因为我们的时间还是比较有限我们希望能给更多的时间给我们的 speaker， 能够来给我们分享他们的这个最佳的实践案例。下面有2位这个演讲者这2位演讲者都是我们的重量级的2位非常有经验的演讲者第一位呢是我们 David O'Brien。David O'Brien 呢是我们一个组织叫做 CORDIO， 就是东非的一个有关海洋保护的组织的这个负责人 他也是创始人，他在这里有很大的这个兴趣和经验，投入到这个海洋系统的保护当中，尤其是在东印度洋海域，尤其是非洲接近的海域。在这里呢，他也采取了很多的这个研究，关于海洋的管理政策、能力建设，以及与各种不同的这个实践者或者利益相关者的交道。他的重要的研究的这个方向和兴趣呢，其实就是关于这个珊瑚礁地区的这个韧性问题，以及气候变化在印度洋方面的这个气候变化。David 是非常有经验的同时这下面这个环节我们更多的可能是关注海洋和可持续的渔业这一块的所以我们今天有把海洋和陆地两块的给大家的最可持续的这个最佳案例给大家进行分享。那么下面第一个我们应该是要有请应该是第一个要有请 David Obra 跟我们分享一下这个 CBNRM 基于社区的自然资源管理如何在这个小尺度的渔业和海洋保护当中起到作用。有请Obra 先生。
Thank you, Dr. Pong. And I've put up my first slide. I hope you have the correct view of it in presentation mode. So first, good afternoon, good morning to all participants and to the other presenters. It's been wonderful to hear the presentation so far. And we're very, very happy to be part of this second session, bringing the marine side to the community-based natural resource management discussions. Of course, a lot of our livelihoods, a lot of the global economy comes from the sea, and we're very conscious of that with increasing pressure on land. So what my charge today is to look at what is the experience for CBNRM in small-scale fisheries on the East African coast. Looking at these questions we addressed in a webinar within the ACBA, the African community, 2 weeks ago. So what impacts does CBNRM have on coastal and marine fisheries and for communities in East Africa? And importantly, what factors have contributed to success? Because we want to work out how to upscale and expand benefits from marine fisheries. I'm really speaking on behalf of my entire team at Cordio. We have a fish ecology and fisheries team. I'm a coral biologist and working mostly with climate change and engaged very strongly with ACBA and these discussions moving forward. But I borrowed from the fisheries team. It's led by Dr. Miletis Samoilis, who's on the call, and I'm sure if we have time for questions, she can answer them better than I can, and the rest of our team in Cordio. So I'll try and move us to the next slide. The regional context for African small-scale or artisanal fisheries. I just want to make this point because we say small-scale fisheries, but in East Africa alone, a recent estimate is that there are perhaps up to 250,000 people dependent on small-scale fisheries just in the Grey region, Eastern African region, and a part of that. And of course, when you extend this population count all around Africa, particularly to West Africa, the entire Atlantic coast where fisheries are very important, this number is very large. And then also, when you look at the value of the fishery assets, this was a study we did in 2017, $135 billion is what we estimated the marine fishery asset of Eastern Africa. So while of course the individuals involved might be on a small scale and we're dealing with traditional fishing that is modernizing and transforming, and it's very much at the community level, of course its impact is huge, both on the ecosystem and resources, but also for the livelihoods of people and the economy. So a very important sector for us to be focused on. So looking at the local impact of CBNRM, we have a number of case studies of community-based projects. We've highlighted this one from the coast of Kenya called Kuruwitu Conservation and Welfare CBO. It's a small beach area along the Kenyan coast. You can see that picture of the fringing reef from the beach out to the reef crest, where fishermen can walk out at low tide and glean, or else go on their canoes and small boats, as in the photo there. as part of the ACBA building up the case for community dependence on biodiversity, we wrote this case study and it's available on the ACBA website. We summarized some of the impacts of improved community-based management for the fishing community in the area. So the community managed area has led to improved fishery and tourism income and coral reef health. And this is over a period of almost 20 years since the initiation of this project until now. I think one of the main points there is it takes a long time, of course, for ecosystem responses to happen to management. And it's very important to be able to get through those initial phases that can be quite difficult. The process of empowerment has built social and economic assets in the community, improving their general resilience on the back of a focus on fisheries initially. There's now community-based tourism, bringing people to the reef. There's also some health projects that have started up. There's great involvement of women in the decision-making processes, so a lot of gender impacts. So the CBNRM really carries a lot of other benefits along with it too. And then there's this transition from stakeholders in the fisheries to shareholders in the community that looks at the reef system and the fishery as a primary asset for that they derive benefits from and that they want to look after and to sustain and improve moving into the future. We looked at some of the success factors for this project and the number of key ones that came out strongly. So co-management legislation and fisheries policy is very important at the national level. And East African countries have been building up their legislation and policies in recent years to support co-management. So the sharing of management responsibilities with local communities. So joint action between communities and the government. Local ownership of the idea is very important, and this is it's critical to have good leadership within local communities and different sectors within the community and stakeholders and dialogue amongst them. It's critical, of course, to build up sustainable revenue from this primary asset, and we heard that very strongly in the first presentation on wildlife tourism in Southern Africa. Of course, it needs initial capital investment to get this off the ground, and both earlier presentations also indicated how you really need to have projects and investment coming in to set up processes and build capacity and so on in order for things to then hopefully run sustainably and by themselves. And another success factor in this community has been external interest. Once it started up and once it was showing benefits locally, it's really generated a huge amount of interest more broadly from other communities to do the same. And so it plays a real flagship role, and that's also helped strengthen the commitment of the community to move forward and continue. So we're very interested in scaling up. So from the local level, how do we build up these community benefits from natural resource management to larger scales? And there's been two national examples of really had going quite strongly in the West Indian Ocean and Eastern Africa and some activity in other countries. But in Madagascar in particular, the establishment of a national network of communities and locally managed marine areas has built up Mihari and has been operating very strongly for 5 or 6 years. In Kenya, which is where Cordio is based, we're based in Mombasa on the south coast. We're focused, there isn't really a national network in the same way, but we're focused down in more sort of sub-regions, sub-national areas south of Mombasa. And in the north against the border with Somalia, there's a range of other community-based initiatives that are really joining together and joining forces to learn from each other and to build up capacity. So in the last 15 years, there's been establishment of hundreds of locally managed marine areas across the countries in the region. In general, these areas are quite small and implementation is varied because of very different capacity levels and support levels. But in Madagascar, some of these LMMAs are very large, and the total network the total area of this network of LMMAs is really comparable to government marine protected areas. And so it can really play a strong role in conservation and in sustainable fisheries moving forward. So working in marine systems in the region, what we have thought as an organization and several others in the region as well is to really focus on co-management as a process for being able to improve the state of the marine environment and benefits to people. And this really takes a focus on capacity building and empowerment in moving forward. So this capacity building, we and others so a lot of NGOs are working together around issues of sustainable gears, building capacity for co-management, how community groups can function to regulate themselves and their fisheries, on networking community-based groups into local, subnational and national fora. And this is very important because, of course, as NGOs and supporters from the outside, we can have a certain role in stimulating activities, but really the energy and the drive has to come from within, and it's within the community-based groups and joining together so they have a larger voice that really generates the strength in moving forward. We also focus on an ecosystem approach to fisheries to ensure that scaling up in fisheries is done in a way that is sustainable into the future and doesn't just further damage fishery resources and in doing so undermine the livelihoods and the benefits that people are getting. And of course, now with climate change, looking into the future, the climate change vulnerability of different fisheries is very important to understand in order to help build resilience for the future, and so to not expand reliance on fisheries that might be very vulnerable to climate change, try and focus on fisheries and practices that will improve resilience. So some of the success factors, again, for this scaling up has been, again, co-management legislation, fisheries policy in each country is important. And of course, countries are quite different from one to the other. The leadership and democratic processes within the groups and within the networks is also very important. And of course, gender representation. The availability of training and capacity building tools for establishing locally managed marine areas or for monitoring how they're performing as well, whether it's fish catch or environmental health, coral reefs, mangroves, seagrasses. We're looking at participatory research on modified fishing gear as well to improve sustainability and climate resilience, and also really to really make the most of local knowledge and experience on what works in fishing and doesn't. And then focusing on these learning networks to facilitate knowledge exchange and peer-to-peer learning. So in pushing forward a CBNRM solution that has real potential at the, across the Eastern African region, and a focus on locally managed marine areas as that specific tool, this slide summarizes a number of what I've stated already in terms of the benefits and the impact that LMMAs can have. And of course, these are very much consistent with just the point at the bottom. There's a code of conduct, the ecosystem approach to fisheries. These are international instruments and guidelines and recommendations for moving forward. So in thinking about how to promote these most effectively, so Melita Samoilis and colleagues in our team, as well as from other NGOs, have really put together a set of policy recommendations to address regional coherence. So going from the local up to the regional level is very important. We have in our region the Nairobi Convention for East and Southern Africa or the West Indian Ocean. This is a UNEP Regional Seas Program convention established over 30 years ago now. So it's been there for quite some time and brings both scientists and management community together around the environment and its use, of fisheries being one of the important ones. And then of course this year with the Convention on Biological Diversity's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which we hope will be accepted and agreed later this year in China. The team have really identified three major policy recommendations on the right, so to deal with all the challenges and the threats to fisheries on the left. And these three policy recommendations are around empowering coastal fishing communities, around area-based protection, A. B is to really focus on sustainable management of small-scale fisheries through protected areas, but also fishing gear regulations and threatened species protection. And then an important pillar for that is how to support this financially, which is always a challenge. And the new interests in blue economy and marine spatial planning are ways that we hope to generate the commitment of funding to support these processes. So just to finalize here, I'll summarize each of those three very quickly. So marine area protection, Of course, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, we know that 10% of marine areas was the target to be conserved by 2020. Within the West Indian Ocean region, we don't have the final measure right now this year, but it was 7% in 2014, and it's likely to be higher than that once the figures for 2020 are added up. And if LMMAs are included, this figure would be quite a bit higher. But a key point is how all these areas are managed, and are they managed for sustainability. The target will go up for 2030, likely to 30%, and we see that LMMAs are one of the primary tools for integrating protection with sustainable use and equity targets under the GBF, so not just protection on its own. The engagement of communities and management is critical, so the LMMAs, as I've mentioned already and focused on. A challenge is the legislation for formalizing LMMAs in community managed areas is often very time consuming, and that needs to be streamlined, and this is a primary recommendation we're making, and lining these up with sustainable financing through the blue economy and marine spatial planning approaches. And lastly, just focusing on the management of small-scale fisheries is essential. We have highly depleted fish stocks along the coastlines. This graph here shows the abundance of sharks around the world, and some of the East African countries in yellow along the y-axis you can see. Most of them we can see that these sharks as flagship species are already depleted. And so we have a lot that we need to do in terms of moving forward. So in linking local to regional governance frameworks, we really need to emphasize that these small-scale fisheries are large and significant. They affect the livelihoods of millions around Africa and key nutrition. The ecosystem approach to fisheries is critical, blending protection, fisheries management, and sustainable use. And the LMMAs are really a core tool for realizing all of these objectives, and that support is really needed through regional, continental, and international processes, such as the discussions we're having here. So I'll finish with that. Thank you for listening.
非常感谢戴伟非常精彩的这个演讲，而且给我们一个很好的一个框架，尤其是在东部的这个西部的印度洋地区，是如何去采取多利益相关方合作的方式来进行这样的一个海洋的保护和管理。我特别有感触的是，你们有30年以上的这样的实践和管理的这个方法，以及这个尺度的扩展的考虑。另一个就是也提出来说，需要在海洋区域通过怎么样的立法，尤其是海洋的社区，通过什么样的立法保障这些海洋的社区能够参与到这个保护当中去。这其实不仅仅是我们海洋的问题，也许是同样的，也是关于这个所有的全球的社区和本地居民如何来进入这个保护的这个关键性的一个问题。所以戴维非常感谢。我想现在我们先把这个后面的演讲者一块儿先演讲完，然后我们再来一块进行讨论，好吗？非常感谢。所以我现在呢，有请下一位的演讲者，他叫韩寒，来自于中国。韩寒呢他是中国蓝色可持续经济研究所的这个创始人，我们中国叫智鱼韩寒做了非常多的创新性的工作，尤其是在海鲜可持续的渔业、海鲜以及可持续的这个社区的海洋社区的一些管理。包括一些海洋食品的这个供应链、海鲜的供应链等等这方面做出了非常好的这个示范和成就而且他们的组织智鱼也得到了包括他个人也得到了很多的这个国际性的这个奖励包括这个2019年的奥巴马亚太的领导者奖等等。所以我想韩寒能够在这一块，在海洋这一块能够给我们介绍一下在中国我们以民间这样的一个角色是如何参与到这个海洋社区的相应的可持续管理或者说利用当中去，能给我们一个中国的示范那我就简单说一下，有请韩寒你可以用中文，但是也必须提醒你注意一下时间，谢谢。
好的，谢谢彭博士。那我需要共享我的屏幕吗？还是你们那边会
你共享。
好，那我现在共享屏幕，大家能看得到吧？
啊，看见，行。
好的，我也可以用英文来去做，我看因为在座的可能大部分都是英文的，那我就用那个英语吧。
可以，
So hello everyone, thank you very much for this great opportunity. We are actually not a conservation organization and are also very young and small. We just started engaging the communities about 3 years ago. So today I think I would not say I'm going to offer many experience or expertise. It's just a starting point. For me, actually, I'm looking forward to learning more from you guys. I come from a tropical island in Hainan, which is the south part of China. This is very unique place. It's a relatively large island, separate from the mainland, and it's under currently under the big sort of policy reform, a pilot in terms of like making a free trade zone. So it carry on with a lot of special policies. But also on the other side, the local people is experiencing great transformation with the urbanization and modernization. And this also occurs to the local fishers and fish farmers. The regular challenges, I think it's pretty much the same everywhere. But I would just emphasize that the key challenges we saw difference in this group of communities compared to other, like the previous speakers mentioned, those ethnic minorities in the northwest part of China. I think here in the coastal area in China, it's a relatively rich area or a relatively developed area. But on the other side is people are facing a vast, fast changing coming from all the economic and social in development. So we sort of like in a very unique situation everything goes too fast. Too fast that to allow people to take digest what's happening and what's going on or what kind of forces are making these changes. And one thing is we have seen that many fishing villages become, we call it hollow inside of villages, which means the younger generation, the younger laborers, they all moved out of the fishing villages to other sectors. Only left the older people, senior people, to continue some traditional fishing practices. But on the other hand, they are facing like the real estate market developers coming to take their land, transforming their traditional fishing villages to coastal 5-star hotels and recreational tourism sites. So the one thing that we realize is if we want to engage the fishers and fish farmers into the conservation or sustainable practices, one thing is we have to make them more visible in front of the public, and also in this way to raise their self-identity, self-culture identity. So we started making a lot of visual records, like the documentary films and artistic the presentations to tell the stories about the fisher, how is the fishing villages changed over the decades, and what kind of a culture that might be missed or overlooked. Try to give them a new way to present themselves in all kinds of social media, museums, or yeah. So for example, like this is a map. It's a simple map, but it kind of graphically designed and with very clear landmarks and illustrations. This is used for anyone who come to the fishing villages. They pick up this and they will quickly find out that the history and the culture identity of this place, and also quickly understand what kind of natural resources surrounding this place. And then we also, there's a lot of people, a lot of photographers often come to the fishing villages and take photos of these fishermen. But usually they only present this on the urban museums or galleries. There's not very little chance that the local people would have the opportunity to see how they look like in this way. So we make this exhibition, photo exhibition in the village, in their tea houses, in their plaza, in the center of the fishing villages. And it's amazing that when old fishermen come to see the picture, he said, oh, this is, thank God, this is like the first ever, the beautiful picture that he ever get a chance to see what he himself looks like. And this kind of a demonstration in all kinds of social media, like the Chinese version of Twitter or Facebook or even like the TikTok, it attracts a lot of other people from you know, outside of the fishing villages or fishing industry, come to exchange the ideas about how to engage with the local people. And this really encourages the local people to look back about their own culture identity, their traditional knowledge, and their what kind of new ways they can make the best value out of this. This is sort of like a social marketing approach to raise their self-respect and to the self-esteem, to build up their confidence about this is not the outdated sector or outdated places. It still has a full of potential for the future. So with that kind of a partnership or engagement with the local communities, we then got a chance to convince them to take some actions that they never thought about they can do. For example, the fishing for litter. This isn't actually borrowed, the concept borrowed from the European countries. They have encouraged a lot of different fishermen to take the litter they sometimes accidentally captured in the fishing nets, to take those litter, the plastic bags, back to the ports. And then we also encourage the fisher to sort it, like what are the plastic bottle or the metal and other type of materials, and even recorded the weight. They wasn't very happy to not on the first place, they were not willing to do this, but with all this communication, and also it's a way to demonstrate their responsibility and their ownership of the neighboring sea area, the Bay Area. I think they kind of got the pride to be like the owner in charge of this area. And also these echoes with the local government who try to promote the better sanitation management for the local environment. So this is something that we try to find a common ground between what's the fishermen's behavior and local government's administration management. Try to find the common ground for both sides that will strengthen the motivation to make this happen on the ground. And the other story coming from, like, there's a lot of the second generation, the younger fisher, who is not just satisfied with the traditional fishing, but also use the smartphones to do the e-commerce selling on their phones. So in this kind of people, we try to help them understand better how to use that kind of technology to connect with the good markets. So this is sort of like the community supported fishery. They started their own business, like to deliver the fresh fish harvest every day, door-to-door service to the customers in the city. So this is something new to the local fishing community, but it's a great opportunity to help build up the younger leadership, to empower the younger leadership. And we believe that as we, in strengthening this kind of partnership with them, later on, there will be opportunity for us to convince them to take more actions in terms of conservation or more sustainable fishing practices, as they have both the buying power and also their higher awareness about what would be the best interest for their longer term. So I have shared a lot of wild fishery stories. There's also a large group of aquaculture, fish farming group in Hainan Island. They're also very small scale. They fish, they farmed for tilapia, for shrimp, or the grouper. And originally, they were just operate on their small farms all by themselves. Over the past years, we cultivated a local farmers organization. So it's sort of like a co-op or alliance. So each one, as they hold this blue tag, the plate, it shows that they are the member of this tilapia sustainable tilapia farmers alliance. And the idea behind that is try to organize them better, then they will have a better opportunity to be given the finance and technical support. The finance support is mainly the insurance, because as we all know that aquaculture insurance is always a challenging when the producers are in a small scale, scattered all over the place. Both the government and the insurance company have found the difficulty to assess their risks or their impacts. So in our case, we formed this 8-party experimental group, try to identify what are the key numbers or key data information that could help us to identify the risks along this whole production cycle, from the feed fingerlings all the way to the harvest, the processing plant. How is the small farmers, what kind of data they should take every day, and what kind of data that could advise them to adjust their feeding or adjust their the use of the drugs, the medicines. And in that case, it will help them to save the feeds that reduce the excessive nutrients discharged from the ponds to the surrounding water bodies, which is it's a very sensitive area for the local mangroves and other ecosystem, the tropical coastal ecosystem. So this data benefits their own production efficiency, and also bring them the opportunity to be given the insurance. The insurance will add another extra power for them to manage the risks and to encourage them to take, for example, the new technology, new instruments, new experiments. So this forms a good cycle, like to promote this kind of a technical innovation and financial innovation further. And with all these experiments, I would say we are still in a very early stage, because this kind of a community level of work in the fishing and coastal area is still a new thing for China. We are probably one of the very few organizations, local grass NGO, to explore this approach. And there's still a lot of uncertainties, unknown. But after all, we think there's always a gap between the very first-hand producer and the local policy enforcement and other technology, financial service providers. Such gap, it highly depends on whether you can play the role with the best understanding about the local culture, social, economic context, and also whether or not you can stay there for longer time enough to earn their trust, earn their respect, because this really requires very long-term partnership. But as you probably heard that the policy changing, the market changing happens really fast in these days. So I think for an NGO like us, we are also facing the challenges how we can make the successful case studies fast enough to demonstrate to the public and to our donors or fundraising organizations. We have to be sort of like compete with a very fast changing environment to demonstrate the mature, convincing pilots to continue this type of exploration. And that's exactly our organization, China Blue, is trying to find the answer. So this is still an ongoing process. I feel very grateful to have this opportunity to share with you, and really looking forward to more exchange in the future. Thank you.
非常感谢 ，Thank you very much， 非常感谢韩寒，非常快速的，也是一个比较精炼的一个介绍哈。我觉得是有2点是非常的，我觉得是非常的重要哈。一个是如何用大家公众喜欢的一种形式去参与到这样的一个宏大的议题当中，而且能有所贡献哈，这是一个非常大的挑战当然也是我们努力的方向。第2个也是怎么样把一些传统的价值引入到这个渔业的可持续的管理和这个社区的可持续的经营当中，这一块我相信全球都在探索这样的一些经验。那么David 和这个韩寒其实给了我们很多这样的一个案例，而且呢从不同的角度来说了这样的一个问题。所以现在我想给一点时间，因为我们的时间有所超出，所以非常抱歉大家，就是我们可能会有一点点的延迟。好，我们有问题要问2位，先用几分钟的时间哈，问一下2位的问题。第一个，我想问一下，那个有观众是给 David this question to you, David. 他说尤其是年轻人和城市的人我就直接可以说英文了哈，因为他这是英文提问的，抱歉。The young and urban residents are now organized into consumer groups. For example, water resource users in Kenya that could be hundreds of kilometers away from the catchments, yet their influence is integrated. Should we consider them CBNRM model? David, please.
I didn't realize it was physical.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pong, for that question. Yes, I think the critical thing we have to understand is that, many of the things that we use in our economies in urban areas and so on are based on nature's services, so ecosystem services. So clean water comes from far away, or else if you are agricultural areas that clear land, there can be a strong impact on the coast because of erosion of soil and sediment into the rivers. So I'm not sure that it would necessarily qualify as community-based natural resource management, but because of the spatial scales involved, unless there's a local reason for doing it. But it's an essential part of the spatial planning frameworks that we need to integrate across scales and all the different stakeholder groups that affect each other through their use of natural resources and their impacts on natural systems. So I think CBNRM will fit within a broader context that could include such water and resource user groups, perhaps. Thank you.
好的，戴维，非常感谢你的非常好的一个回答。这个确实是一个非常复杂的问题那这里还有一个对于韩寒的一个这个讲的一个评论哈他们这个是来自于 CORDIO 的 Manit 他的评论是觉得韩寒这样的方式主要是怎样用一个故事以及他们的文化 以及社交媒体来帮助当地的社区以及新的渔民或渔民2代和这些已有的渔民来思考怎么样去尊重这些生态的保护，以及呢他们的传统的利用方式，这样的方式来更大的影响这样的这个保护，这是非常的重要的一个部分。那么我可能有一个小问题问韩寒，就是在你们所进行的这样的一个过程当中，是如何去用这么基于一个科学的方式，就是你的科学获取的数据相当的困难，对于海洋来说，那么你们是如何把这种科学利用的方式、科学的数据，来运用到这个社区行动的保护和它今后的这个监测它的成果当中去的？你能简短的说一下吗？
彭博士的这个问题非常好。其实我的回答是说，我们现在还远远没有走到那一步。现在就像我说的，还是比较早期的阶段，就是可能更多的是在建立关系，然后以及跟他们去建立这种信任。那当然，我们在一些养殖端是已经有采集一些数据的。就像刚才说到的这种水质监测的数据，他们的一些投苗呀、养殖过程的数据，这些数据是已经能够在日常中间反馈给他们。当然就是说我们想找到那个非常标准的一些科学规律，那个可能现在不仅我们做不到，其实水产养殖专家也很难做到，因为它是一个非常动态因地制宜的一个过程。所以这个是我觉得对于就是包括他们当地的这些养殖区域的人来说，他们的这些东西不仅仅对它生产，那么我们希望他了解，比如对红树林会有什么影响，对红树林当地的物种后这些会有什么样的影响，其实都还是一个漫长的一个去，我觉得这是我们在尝试做那个 traditional 那个ecological 那个 knowledge 的那个 TEK 的那个方法，包括跟渔民去了解他们以前看到这片区域经常会这个捕获到哪些物种。那么现在这些年过去以后，通过一些口述历史的方式来去回顾他们的东西。对，这个我确实我们只是刚刚起步，所以也很期待说跟像你们有更丰富经验的同行一起来去探索这个路子。
特别感谢，特别感谢我想我们现在我要做一个小小的通知哈，因为按照我们的预定时间是5点10分结束，但是我们其实有很多人有很多的问题，包括刚才问到前面的这个演讲者，还有很多的问题想说，还没有去回答，所以我们可能会延迟10分钟左右，10到15分钟。如果我们这里的同事自己有另外的事情，你们可以离开，但是我也很希望听到大家更多的在这里的讨论，因为有很精彩的这个论点的分享，非常难得的一个机会，尤其是国际我们的对话和交流的坦诚的交流的机会。好，我们下边的这个问题可能从这儿开始，我要交给一下这个我们的 Maxi。因为刚才有几个问题没有回答，包括刚才对香莹和这个 Dr. Sherlock 两位的这个问题，我想你们这个时候可以有这个机会能回应一下刚才那个问题，我不知道你们还能不能记得住。有请香莹，要不你来先开始。香莹在吗？Okay, good. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Peng. There was one question that was asked from the platform, and that has to do with the question with the issue of sustainability, and that is to Shi, what is your approach to sustainable financing for Indigenous people, and the work that is being done currently within your project, and why is it proving to be so effective? So that is the sustainability question in terms of funding. Do you want to answer that quickly?
Yeah, actually, this is a very important question for our conservation projects. I think, firstly, we hope to get more sustainable funding from our donors, from the private sector and foundations, because they support our conservation work as pilots. And also, gradually, there are a lot of the general public want to donate to conservation projects. So now there are crowdsourcing funding platforms that people can donate very few amount, but there will be a great amount if there are a lot of people. So this is one channel. Actually, we do this in very broad platforms like Alipay or Tencent, which is very popular in China. Secondly, very importantly, the government funding is important. As in national parks, there are policies that people get ranger jobs. The employment can also funding the local communities, and also I think in future more benefit sharing mechanism will be designed by the policy makers. Finally, I think if the sustainable livelihoods is successful, the conservation fund and the community fund can be running well. So I think this model can be also sustainable itself. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chi. David, do you also want to add to this?
Yes, thank you, Maxi. If I may just briefly on this issue of sustainable finance, because of course there's a lot of, the model has been for biodiversity benefits and things like that has been through external funding and some philanthropic funding as well. The markets have tended to really focus just on production and consumption, you know, of maximizing production and profit. But I think increasingly recognizing all the benefits from nature and through payments for ecosystem service schemes. So if you get coastal protection or if you get water treatment through an ecosystem or carbon sequestration, then being able to generate finance through that can help, you know, maintain that ecosystem and provide other benefits as well. So with this sort of new approaches that Shishi just mentioned, I think that's really an important way of the future and trying to work out how that can work at the small scale and building up from small scale and community efforts to larger sort of, I guess, essentially natural capital funds that can really support the management of these systems and conservation. Thank you.
Dr. Peng, over to you.
好，非常好。我这里还有一个问题，可能对这个Dr. Sherlock 可能还有一个这个问题。这个问题的说，我们提到了在我们的非洲有好多的这个项目，或者说这个地方把这个狩猎的这个收入有一半或者甚至更大的比例回到这个社区。那么这样的一种方式，我们看起来是非常棒的一个这个回馈社区保护的一个行为。那么在这里是否有一个问题，就是它有可能会刺激到更多的地方的去狩猎，就是因为我们有这样的这个去商业性的狩猎，或者说这个狩猎的配额它是定的里边起到什么样的作用？是不是由他自己社区来决定我狩猎的份额？还是说我们国家已经政府有这样的一个固定的这个规则，需要共同去遵守？所以在这一块是如何解决这样一个问题的？我想问一下肖若先生。
Yes, thanks. So the whole quota setting is a participatory process where the community and the respective agencies and local district councils participate and agree. And this system is based on extensive data collection. Currently, we have a system called management-oriented monitoring system, where locally employed community game guards patrol the conservation areas, record wildlife sightings, remove poaching traps, and so on. And then that data is then put together with the data that's collected through area surveys, which are supposed to be run after every 5 years in order to understand the numbers and so on. And based on the ecology, so also the forests are being monitored and so on. So it's based on all those factors that the stakeholders will then collaborate on a process of quota setting. Obviously, that varies across countries. For example, parks departments in most of these countries normally have a final say on what will be the final quota allocation a specific year. And at times the quota can be withheld for purposes of compliance, for example, audits, when there's misuse of funds and so on. The authorities can then sort of play the big brother there and withhold the quota system. But in short, it's a combination of a consultative process based on locally collected data, and that is also superimposed by our conventional scientific data.
非常感谢穆耶瓦博士你的回答。其实回答听众的问题，可能听众其实还有很多的问题。我想今天我们的时间真的是非常的有限，非常的抱歉，不能让大家能够更深入的往下再多一些问题和回答。但是呢，如果我们有更多的问题，我们后边还有参与的方式和机会贡献给大家。那么下边我可能要邀请。我这边的这个环节应该是结束，我要邀请这个 Max 可能给我们2人有2分钟的时间做一个总结。现在我当然要首先请 Max 来做一个简单的对今天这个交流的一个总结。有请 Max。Please, Max.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peng, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants on the call. As we said at the beginning, this is our first collaboration, for many more to come in terms of the collaboration between the two alliances. I was very impressed with the discussions that we had on the panel and the questions that came through. We are very sorry, time is never enough, but as we said, this is not the last time, and we would like to see you again back in terms of further webinar discussion. So we are going to have our next webinar around May. If you can just make sure that you attend that one, the location and the topics will be sent to you, and that will be decided and also sent to you. But thank you so much.
好，特别感谢 Max 精彩的总结。好，其实这里我们有联系的方式，我们可以从 ACBA 就是我们的非洲方的这边的联系方式，也有我们中国生物多样性保护联盟的联系方式，大家可以以这里进行这个加入，然后进行更深入的讨论，也可以发出里面的问题给直接的这个演讲者，或者说我们的专家以及我们的组织委员会。我最后简单说1分钟2分钟就是首先我要感谢我们所有的这个重量级的这些speaker 他们这样的专家其实不仅仅是一些理论的专家，而是在所有的我们希望能够基于 best practice 的这样的方式，能够给大家带来真实的保护的这个从政策到落地的这样的一些示范和案例。我要告诉大家的是，在随后的这个过程当中，我们会有4到5次的这样的这个案例分享，每一次有2位来自于非洲的案例，有2位来自于中国的案例。我想这样的案例是很多人希望看到，而且希望能够去学习，或者说更多的兴趣去推动的。那么我们希望这样的案例的推动和我们论题的讨论，能够给我们即将进行的 COP15 的相应的这个谈判，或者说他们听到这些声音，然后看到这些实践，也希望能够更多的去传达到政策以及我们的这个想要解决的问题。那么今天的非常有荣幸的是，我们既讨论了保护，也讨论了发展，我们既有陆地的，也谈到了海洋2样的生态系统， 我们既有这个非洲，也有来自于中国的这样的不同的这个大陆的这个非常不一样的这个视角和这个其实是非常有一致的这些目标。然后我们还有2位这个男性的这个专家，还有2位女性的专家，我们也非常符合了我们的性别平等的这个议题，女性主，尤其是我们女性的 leadership 在这里的生动的体现。我们也希望能把这样的一个非常好的这样的一个方式，我们能够持续下去，来展现我们的这个自主的一个平台所对话所产生的力量。我们当然也很希望我们这样的一个行动能够产生相应的后续的效果，也就是在长远的我们中国和非洲两方从这个交流开始，到后边我们落地的合作，以及我们谈到的今后的交流，我们希望更多的人和机构能够加入进来。在疫情之后，我们期盼在疫情之后，我们能够根据这个新的生物多样性的目标，能够去做实际的这个线下的交流访问，以及我们能力的建设，以及甚至是一些落地的项目。无论是非洲的朋友们来到中国，还是中国的朋友们去非洲，我们特别欢迎大家能够加入到这个从谈论交流到我们的实际的工作当中，为我们这样一个行动去贡献我们自己能够贡献的民间的这个力量。非常的感谢大家，我希望大家能够在这里去连接到相应的这个专家。我也给各位这个 speaker 的这个提出一点要求，就是我们的每一个案例的分享，希望能够写出真实的这个文字的案例，能够我们一块总结起来，然后把这些案例逐渐成为这个能够在 COP15能够去看到的一些案例，也会贡献给双方的这个联盟。我说的就这些，非常感谢大家，今天我们的会议就到此结束，非常感谢 ，Thank you very much， 也感谢我们的观众
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Maxi.
Thank you. Thank you, Janman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maxi, Javan, Sharon.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Dr. Peng Qian.
Thank you, Jia. Thank you, Dr. Peng.
Thank you, Maxi. Thank you.
It was
Bye.
a great experience.
Yes. You did a good job, Maxi and Dr. Peng.
Sorry?
You did a good job.
Yes.